So what happened roughly previously? There was a different guy who came to the house, and you could say he was kind of hitting on Stella. And then when he tried to push her away from it, she was basically defending, what's the name of the man? Leicester. She was defending Leicester, if I recall correctly. Yeah. That's pretty much what's been happening. And I think next we'll be following in Stella's part of the story. Yeah. Okay. I am Lucius. Hello, nice name by the way. I'm actually so sleepy. Okay. So, let's get started. So for those of you who are wondering, I am reading A Girl's Love by Charles Garvice, Chapter 6. Hey look man, thank you so much for the rose. Okay. I am not looking forward to voice act the girl characters again. It's going to be so tiring to my throat. Thank you so much for the like, man. Okay. Okay. Let's get started, shall we? Okay. Stella heard a step on the threshold of the window, and turning to follow the direction of his eyes, saw the stalwart form of Lord Leicester standing in the window. He was dressed in a suit of brown velveteen, with tight-fitting breeches and stockings, and carried a whip in his hand, which he barred the entrance against a couple of collies, a huge mastiff, a Skye Terrier, the last barking with a furious indignation at kept outside. Hey Luna, thank you so much for the follow. Yeah, I think the whip, I'm pretty sure, is for the horse. Let's not read too much into it yet, shall we? I mean, it could be for the horse or someone else, right? Even at a moment of surprise, Stella was conscious of a sudden reluctant thrill of admiration for the graceful figure in a close-fitting velvet, and the handsome face with its dark eyes, regarding her with a grave, respectful intentness. Back, dogs. Okay, this might be a bit too loud. Back, dogs. Back, back, he said. Go back, Vix. Then, as they drew back, the big ones, throwing themselves on the path with patient obedience, he came into the room. I beg your pardon, he said, standing before Stella, his head bent. I thought Mr. Etheridge was alone. Why should I have entered in this rough fashion? As he spoke in the lane, Hey Lucille, thank you so much. Didi, who's that? Lucille, thank you so much for the like. As he spoke in the lane, so now it was no meaningless excuse, but with a tone of the most reverential respect and proud humility. Stella, girl-like, noticed that he did not even venture to hold out his hand. And certainly, Mr. Addlestone's self-satisfied smile and assured manner rose in her mind to contrast with his stately, high-bred humility. Oh my god. I'm going to have to do the female voice. Do not apologize. It does not matter, she said, conscious that her face had grown crimson and that her eyes were downcast. Hey guys, thank you so much for the like. Does it not? I'm forgiven. And he held out his hand. Stella had crossed her hands, and behind her he entered with an instinctive desire to hide her bare arms and the flower. Now she put out her hand and a few inches and held it with a smile. He looked at the white hand and a white arm so beautifully molded that a sculptor would have sighed over it in despair in his inability to imitate it. And he held out his own hand. "I do not mind the flower," he said, not as Mr. Addleston would have said it, but simply, naturally. Stella gave him one small tap of finger, and he took it and held it for a moment. Okay. His eyes smiling into hers, and he relinquished it, with not a word of commonplace compliment, but in silence, and turned to Mr. Atteridge. "It is quite hopeless to ask you to forgive me. You know, I know. So I won't ask." Hey guys, thank you so much for the follow. He said there in his full voice, and then Stella noticed a frank candor that was almost boyish but full of respect. At once it seemed to imitate that he had known and honored the old man, since he, Leicester, was a boy. "How are you, my lord?" said Mr. Atteridge, giving him a long, thin hand, but still keeping a hold, as it were, on his beloved easel. "Taking the dogs for a walk? Are they safe? Take care, Stella." For Stella, kneeling down in the midst of them, making friends with a huge mastiff, much to the jealous disgust of the others, who were literally crowding and pushing around her. Lord Leicester looked round and was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the kneeling girl rather than on the dogs. Then he said, suddenly, "They are quite safe." And then he added, for Stella's behalf, "They are quite safe, Miss Atteridge." Stella turned her face towards him. "I'm not afraid. I should as soon as think biting them as they would dream of biting me, wouldn't you?" And she drew the mastiff's great head onto her lap, where it lay with his big eyes, looking up at her piteously as he licked as he licked her hand. Okay. Okay, I see where this is going. "Great heavens! What a herd of them!" said Mr. Atteridge, who loved dogs, on canvas. I ought not to have brought them," said Lord Leicester, "but they will be quite quiet, and do not harm, I assure you." "I do not care if they bite my niece," said Mr. Atteridge. "There is no fear of that," he said, quietly. "Or should I not allow her to go near them? Please, go on with your work, or I shall think I am a nuisance." Mr. Atteridge waved him to a chair. "Won't you sit down?" Lord Leicester shook his head. "I have come to ask you a favour," he said. Mr. Atteridge nodded. "What is it?" Lord Leicester laughed his rare laugh. "I am trembling in my shoes. My tongue cleaves to my mouth with nervousness." The old painter glanced round at him, and his face relaxed into a smile as he rested on the bold, handsome face and easy grace of the speaker. "Yes, you look excessively frightened," he said. "What is it?" Hey guys, thank you so much for the follow. It was noticeable that, accepting in his first greeting, the old man had not given him the benefit of his title. He had known where Leicester had been a boy. running in and out of the cottage, always followed by a pack of dogs, and generally doing some mischief. I want you to do a little scene for me. The old man groaned and looked at his picture firmly. You know the glade in the woods opening, out opposite a small island? Yes, I want you to paint it. I'm sorry, began the old man. Lord Leicester went on, interrupting him gently. Have you seen it lately, he said, and he spoke Stella into the room, enticing the mastiff after her, and with a handful of biscuits she had taken from the chiffonier. It is beautiful. It is the loveliest bit on the whole river. Right up from the stream, it stretches green, and with the young spring leaves, to the sky above the hill. In the open space between the trees, the prime roses have made a golden carpet. I saw 2 kingfishers sailing it up, and I stood and looked this morning. And I looked, and I thought how delightfully you would have to put it on the canvas. Think, the bright green, the golden foreground, the early summer sky, to crown the whole reflected in the river running below. Mr. Atteridge paused in his work and listened, and Stella, kneeling over the dog, listened too, with a down-bent face, and wondered how the painter could stand so firm and obstinate. To her, the voice sounded like the sweetest music set to poem. She saw the picture as he drew it, and in her heart the music of the words and the voice an echoing harmony. Forgotten was the other man's warning. Vain it would have been if he had repeated it at that moment. As well associate the darkness of a winter's night with the bright gladness of a summer's morning, as think of evil in connection with a noble face and musical voice. Hey Tabby, thank you so much for the roses. Mr. Atteridge paused, but he shook his head. Very fine. Very temptingly put. You are a master of words, Leicester. But I am immovable as a rock. Indeed, your eloquence is wasted. It is not an impressionable man whom you address. I, James Atteridge, am on this picture. I am lost in my work, Lord Leicester. You will not do it. The old man smiled. I will not. To another man I should present an excuse and mask my refusal. With you, anything but a simple no is of no avail. Lord Leicester smiled. Hey guys, thank you so much for the shares and likes. I love you all. Thank you. Okay, where was I? Okay, I wanted to see if you would do something for me. For myself, he said, with infinite naivety. You want it for Lady Lillian, said Mr. Atteridge. I will do it, of course. Yeah, bedtime story. I shan't say thank you, said Lord Leicester. I have nothing to thank you for. She shall do that. She shall do that. When will you come? There's a cut here, just for you guys to know. Next week. Next month. Now, at once, said Lord Leicester, stretching out his hand with a peculiar gesture which struck Stella by its infinite grace. The old man groaned. I thought so. I thought so. It would always be now and at once with you. The spring won't wait for you. The green of those leaves is changing now, very slowly but surely as we speak. In a week it will be gone, and with it, all the beauty will go too. You will come now, will you not? Mr. Atterich looked round, and with comical dismay, and then he laughed. Lord Leicester's laugh chimed in, and he turned to Stella with the air of a man who has conquered and needs no more words. Guys, thank you so much for the shares and likes. I really appreciate it. You see, said Mr. Atterich, that is the way that I am led, like a pig to market. Will I, or will I not? The sketch will take me how long? A few hours. And there will be all the things to drag down. Lord Leicester strode into an old-fashioned cabinet. I will carry them, and yourself into the bargain if you like. Then, with his hand upon the cabinet, he stopped short and turned to Stella. I beg your pardon. I am always sinning. I forget that there was now a presiding spirit. I'm so used to taking liberties with your uncle's belongings. I know where all his paraphernalia is so well, and that... Stella rose and smiled. Your knowledge is deeper than my uncle's then, she said. Do not beg pardon of me. May I? He said, and he opened a cabinet and took out the sketching pad and color box. Then, with some difficulty, he disentangled to a folding compote stool from a mass of artistic litter in a corner, and then prepared to depart. Mr. Atterich watched as these proceedings with a rueful countenance, but seeing that resistance had long passed out of his power, he said, Where is my hat, Stella? I must go, I suppose. Lord Leicester opened the door for her, and she went out, followed by all the dogs, and fetched the soft felt hat, holding it by the very tips of her fingers. With a sigh, Mr. Atterich dropped it on his head. Give me some of those things, he said, but Lord Leicester declined. Okay, pretend I'm Mr. Leicester. Not one, he said, laughing. And then Mr. Atterich, without a word, walked out. Lord Leicester stood looking at a wistful eagerness in his eyes. I have made... Oh, sorry. Stella started, and an eager light flashed for a moment in her eyes, and then she held out her hands and laughed. I have to make a pudding, she said. He looked at the white arms, and then at her, and with an intensified eagerness. If you knew how beautiful the morning is, how grand the river looks, you will let the pudding go. Okay, that's a bit sussy. Stella shook her head. He inclined his head. Okay, where was I? Yeah, that's very sus. I'm so sorry, he said. Simply, I'm so sorry that I've gained my way, and that I thought that you would have come. Stella stood silent, and then, with something like a sigh, put down the things and held out her hand. But he took the fingers which she gave him. His face brightened, exactly like my face, you see. It's brightened like this. And a light came into his eyes. Are you still firm? I will not desert the pudding for anything, my lord, said Stella naively. At the "my lord," a slight shade covered his face. But he went again instantly as he said, "Well then, will you come when the inevitable pudding is made?" "There," he said, eagerly, and still holding her hand as he drew to the window and pointed with his whip. "There's the place. It is not far, just across the meadows. Through the gate. Do you see it?" "Yes," Stella said, gently withdrawing her hand. "And you will come?" he said, his eyes fixed on her with the intent of earnestness. At that instant, the odious word infamous rang in her ears, and then all of a sudden her face paled. He noticed the sudden pallor as his eyes grew dark. "I see," he said quietly. "You will not come." What was it that moved her? Or was the sudden impulse that she raised her eyes and looked at him steadily? "Yes, I will come," she said. Okay. Stella stood. He inclined his head without a word and called to the dogs and passed out. Hey guys, thank you so much for the share. It means a lot to me. Stella stood for a moment looking after them, and then she went into the kitchen, not laughing, not singing, but with a strange gravity. A strange feeling had got possession of her. She felt as if she was laboring under some spell, as if she was charmed. It is an often misused word, but is it the right word to describe the sensation? Was it his face or his voice that haunted her as she stood absently looking down at the table? Simple words, short and commonplace, which he had used, rang in her ears with new meaning. Mrs. Penfold stood and regarded her in curious astonishment. She was getting used to Stella's quickly changing moods, but the sudden change bewildered her. "Let me do it, Miss Stella," she pleaded. But Stella shook her head firmly. Not by 1 inch would she swerve from her cause of all the beautiful voice and noble face. In a rapt silence, she finished her work, and then she went upstairs and put on her hat and came down. As she passed out of the house and down the path, a mastiff leaped the gate and bounded towards her, and the next moment she saw Lord Leicester seated on a stile. He dropped down and came towards her. "How quick you have been," he said. I thought a pudding was a mystery which demanded an immensity of time." Stella looked at him, her dark brows drawn to a straight line. "You waited for me?" she said. "No," he said simply. "I came back I do not like to think that you should come alone. Stella was silent. Are you angry? He asked in a low voice. Stella was silent for a moment, and then she looked at him frankly. No, she said. If she had but said yes and turned back, but a path, all beautiful with the bright coloring of spring, stretched before her. And she had no thought of turning back, no thought or suspicion of the dark and perilous land towards which she was traveling by his side. Already the glamour of love was falling upon her, like the soft mist of summer evening. Passively, she was moving towards the fates which the gods had prepared for her. Okay. So, what do you guys think so far? That is chapter 6. Yeah, it's meant to make you guys sleepy, I think. Are you guys feeling sleepy yet? Are you guys enjoying your time? Yeah. I'm glad I'm able to help you guys with that. Yeah, how's the story so far? I hope I'm capable of bringing more exposure to you guys. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, this is actually my new model. You can definitely see the difference if you come into my page. It's definitely something, right, Hannah? It's completely sus. Hey, Sa-chan, thank you so much for sharing. Love you all. Okay. Let's get back to it, shall we? I will continue with chapter 7. Side by side, they walked across the meadows, the larks rising before them and soaring up to the heavens with a burst of song. The river running in silvery silence to the sea, the green trees waving gently in the summer breeze, and above them, the long stretching grey masonry of Windward Hall. Lord Leicester was strange silent for some minutes since that "Are you angry?" question, and Stella, as she walked by his side, stooping now and again to gather a cowslip, glanced up at his face and wondered whether her uncle could be mistaken, whether or not they were all deceived in thinking the quiet, graceful creature with a beautiful face and dreamy, almost womanly soft eyes, wild and reckless and desperate and altogether bad. Hey Cece, or is it Ensun? Hi, welcome. Welcome everyone. She almost forgot how she had seen him on that first night of their meeting, with his whip and upraised and the sudden fire of anger in his eyes. Presently he spoke, and so suddenly that Stella, who had been lost in her speculations respecting him, started guiltily. "I have been wondering," he said, "how Mr. Atteridge takes the change which your presence must have made in the cottage." "Yes, I'm reading a story." Welcome everyone. Stella looked up with surprise, and then smiled. Oh, 1 second. I accidentally scrolled. Give me a second. Okay, there we go. Lord Leicester looked down at her. "That is a rebuke for presumption of my remark," he said. Oh, thank you so much for the heart. Thank you, Cece. "No," said Stella. "I do not mean to be presumptuous. Think. Your uncle has lived the whole of his life alone, the life of a solitary, a hermit. Suddenly, there enters into that life a young a young girl, full of the spirit and youth, and its aspirations, and must make of a great change." "As I said," says Stella, "he bears with fortitude." Then, she added, in a lower voice, "He is very, very good to me." "He could not be otherwise," was the quiet response. "I mean, that he could not have been anything but good, gentle, and loving with any living thing. I had known him since I was a boy," he added. "He was always the same, always living a life of dreams. I wondered if he takes you as a dream." "A very substantial and responsible one, then?" said Stella, with a little laugh. "One that lasts through the daytime." "Hello, Primer Iced Tea. Welcome, welcome." He looked at her with a strange intent look, which she had learned he could not meet. "And you," he said. "I?" said Stella, though she knew what he meant exactly. He nodded. "How do you like the change? This still, quiet life in the Thames Valley. Are you tired of it already? Will you pine for all the gaieties that you have left?" Stella looked up at him. His eyes were still fixed onto hers. "I have left no gaieties," she said. "I have left a bare and horrid school that was as unlike home as the desert of Sahara. As unlike this lovely meadow. How do I feel? As if I had been translated to paradise. As if I, who was beginning to think that I was alone in the world, that I had no business to be in, and had found some friend to love." She paused, and then, glancing back at the black waistband to her white dress, said with the tenderest and most humble voice, "I beg your pardon. Will you forgive me? I did not know." And then his voice broke. Stella looked at him with a smile shining through the unshed tears. "How? Why should you have known? Yes, I was quite alone in the world. My father died a year ago." "Forgive me," he murmured, and he laid his hand with a feather's weight on her arm. "I implore you to forgive me. It was cruel and thoughtless." "No," said Stella. "How should you have known? If I had been anything better than an unthinking brute, I might have guessed." There was a moment's pause, and then Stella spoke. "Yes, it is paradise. I had no idea England was like this. They called it the land of fogs." "You have not seen London on a November evening?" he said, with a laugh. "Most foreigners come to England and put up at some hotel at the West End and judge the whole land by the London sample. Very few come even so as far as this. You have not been to London?" "I passed through it," said Stella, That is all, but I heard a great deal about it last night. Yes, he said, with great interest. Last night. Hey, yes, hi. Hi, everyone. Yes, and Mrs. Hamilton's. She was kind enough to ask me to an evening party, and one of the guests took great pains to impress me with the importance and magnificence of London. He looked at her. May I ask who she was? He said. It was not a she, but a gentleman. It was Mr. Addleston. Lord Leicester thought a moment. Addleston. Addleston. I don't know him. Before she was quite aware of it, a retort slipped from her lips. He knows you. He looked at her with a thoughtful smile. Does he? Well, I certainly don't remember him. Stay, yes. Isn't he a relation of Mr. Fielding's? His nephew, said Stella. And feeling the dark, penetrating eyes, she blushed faintly. It annoyed her, and she struggled to suppress it, but the blush came, and he saw it. Yes, a story reader, high searchlight. Okay, where was I? Yeah, I remember him now, he said. Tall, thin, dark man. Lawyer, I believe. Yes, I remember him. And he told you about London. Yes, she said. And as she remembered the conversation of a few hours ago, her color deepened. He is a very amusing and well-informed, and he took pity on my ignorance in the kindest way. I was very grateful. There was something in her tone that made him look at her questioningly. I think, he said, your gratitude is easily earned. Oh, hi Blue Mooney. Hi. Oh, you came here from Mighty. Hi. Hey guys, thank you all so much for the follow. Okay, where was I? Oh no, she retorted. I'm the most ungrateful of beings. Isn't that uncle sitting there? She added, quickly to change the subject. He looked up. Yes, he's hard at work. I did not think I should have warned him. It was my sister's name that worked the magic charm. He is fond of your sister then? Said Stella, thoughtfully. His eyes were on her in an instant. Has he spoken of her? He said. Stella could have bitten her tongue out for the slip. Yes, she said. He told me about her. I asked him whose house was it on the hills? Meaning the hall, he said, pointing with his whip. Yo, he's pointing with his whip? Dude. Yes, he told me, and I knew by the way he spoke of your sister that he was quite fond of her. Her name is Lillian, is it not? Yes, he said. Lillian, and the name of his lips with soft tenderness. I think everyone who knows her loves her. This picture is for her. Stella glanced up at his face. Anything less imperious at that moment it would have been impossible to imagine. Lady Lillian is fond of pictures, she said. Yes, he said. She's devoted to art of all forms. Yes, the little sketch will give her more pleasure than I scarcely know what to say. What are women most fond of? Stella laughed. Diamonds, are they not? Are you fond of them? He said. I think not. Why not? She retorted. Why should I have not the attributes of my sex? Yes, I am fond of diamonds. I am fond of everything that is beautiful and costly and rare. I remember once going to a ball in Florence. He looked at her. Only to see it, she exclaimed. I was too young to be seen, and they took me in a gallery overlooking the great salon, and I watched the great ladies in their beautiful dresses and shining gems, and I thought I would give it all of the world to be like one of them. And the thought that spoiled my enjoyment. I remember coming away, crying. You see, it was so dark in the great gallery. I feel so mean and a little insignificant. And then she laughed. He was listening with earnest interest. Every word he said had a charm to him. I see he's slowly falling for her even bit more and more. Okay. Where were we? Every word she said had a charm to him. He had never met any girl, any woman quite like her. That's a bit interesting, don't you think? Don't you guys think? Okay. So, listening to her was like looking into a pure crystal lake, in which everything is revealed and all is bright and pure. And are you wiser now? He asked. Not one whit, she replied. I should, like now, less than then, to be shut up in a dark gallery and look onto the others enjoying themselves. Isn't that a confession of an envious and altogether wicked disposition? Yes, he assented, with a strange smile barely escaping from his undertiny mustache. I should be right in prophesying all sorts of bad endings to you. As he spoke, he opened the gate for her, driving the dogs back and with a crack of his whip that she might pass first. A small thing, but characteristic of him. The painter looked up. Keep those dogs off my back, Leicester. Oh, sorry, wrong character. Keep those dogs off my back, Leicester, he said. Well, Stella, have you concocted your poison? Stella went and looked over his shoulder. Yes, uncle, she said. You have been long enough to make the 20 indigestible compounds, he said, gazing at the view he was sketching. Stella bent her head to hide the blush which rose as she remembered how slowly they had walked across the meadows. Are you getting on? Lord Leicester said. The old man grunted. Pretty well. Better than I shall have now they have come to fidget about. Lord Leicester laughed. A pretty plain hint that our room is desired more than our company. Miss Atteridge, can we not vanish into space? Stella laughed and sank down onto the grass. "It is of Uncle's way of begging us to stay," she said. Lord Leicester laughed, and sending the dogs off, flung himself almost at her feet. Hey, thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to voice the characters so that you guys understand which character is what. So far there's 3 prominent characters. There's the uncle, Mr. Etheridge, which I go something like, "Not an atom." And the girl, which I've only done 1 accent. And then there's the guy, which is Lord Leicester. These are the 3 main occurring characters that you'll see. Give me a moment. Gotta stay hydrated. Okay, where were we? Okay. Lord Leicester laughed, sending the dogs off, and flung himself down almost at her feet. "Did I exaggerate?" he said, pointing his whip at the view. How is this man pointing his whip? I don't understand. "Not an atom," replied Stella. "It is beautiful. And that is all one can find to say." Oh, thank you so much for compliments for the vocal range. I really appreciate it. Hey all, thank you so much for the follow. Okay. "I wish you would be content to say and not insisted upon my painting," replied Mr. Etheridge. Lord Leicester sprang to his feet. "This is the last straw. We will not remain to be abused, Miss Etheridge," he said. Stella remained immovable. He came and stood over her, looking down at with wistful eagerness in silence. "What lovely woods," she said. "You were right. They are carpeted with primroses. We have none in our meadow." "Would you like to go and get some?" he asked. Stella turned to face him. "Yes, but I don't care to swim across." For those of you who are wondering and are new to the chat, I am reading A Girl's Love by Charles Garvice. You can find this. It's a fantasy novel. Okay, where was I? Right. He smiled and went down to the bank and fastened a boat, and leaping into it, and then called to her. Stella sprang to her feet with the impulsive delight of a girl at the sight of a boat. You know, the giddy feeling? Thank you guys so much. When she had expecting nothing but better than rushes. "Is this a boat? Really?" she exclaimed. "Well, come and see," he said. She went down to the water's edge and looked at it. How did it come there?" she asked. "I pay a ferry to drop a boat from the skies whenever I want it." I see," said Stella gravely. He laughed. "How do you think I came across? Do you think I swam?" And he arranged a cushion. She laughed. I forgot that. How silly of me." "Will you step in?" he said. Stella looked back at her uncle and hesitated a moment. "He will assure you that I shall not drown you," he said. "I'm not afraid. Do you think I am afraid?" she said, scornfully. "Yes, I think at this moment you are trembling with nervousness and dread." She put her foot. He could not help seeing how small and shapely it was. on the gunwale, and he held out his hands and took hers. It was well he did so. The boat was only so small, lightly built, and her sudden movement had made it rock. Hey Levi, thank you so much for the follow. Hi guys. Yeah, this man has absolute riz, I have to say. As it was, she staggered slightly, and he had to take her by the arm. So, with one hand grasping her hand and the other her arm, he held her for a moment, for longer than a moment. Then he placed her on the cushion and, seating himself, took up the sculls and pushed off. Stella leaned back and, of course, dropped one hand in the water. Not one woman out of 20 who ever sat in a boat can resist the impulse to have a closer communion with the water, and he pulled slowly across the stream. The sun shone full upon them, making their way a path of rippling gold and turning Stella's hair into rich brown. Yeah, you're right, hand-holding before marriage is diabolical. Little wonder that, as he sat opposite her, his eyes should rest on her face, and less than thus resting its exquisite beauty and freshness and purity should sink into a soul of him to whom beauty was the one thing worth living for. Unconscious of his rapt gaze, Stella leaned back, her eyes fixed on the water, her whole attention absorbed by its musical ripple as it ran through her fingers. In silence, he pulled the sculls, slowly and noiselessly. He would not have spoken and broken the spell for words. Before him, as he looked upon her, rose the picture of which he had spoken to his sister last night. But more beautiful, he mused. More beautiful. How lost she is. She has forgotten me. Forgotten everything. Oh heaven, if one were to waken her into love. For an instant, at the thought, the color came back into his face, and the fire to his eyes. And then, half guilty and half repenting feeling struck through him. No, it would be cruel, and yet to see the azure light shining in those eyes, to see those lips half parted with the breath of a great passion, would be worth what? It would make amends for all that a man might suffer, though he died the next moment. If those lips were unturned for the love of all. So lost that the touching of a boat and the bang made them start. So soon, murmured Stella. How beautiful it is. I think I was dreaming. Yes, hi Nico. And I know that I was, he said, with a subtle significance, as he rose and held out his hand. But Stella sprang lightly on shore without accepting it. He tied upon the boat, and then he followed her. She was ready on her knee, picking at the yellow prime roses. Without a word, He followed her example. Sometimes they were so near together that she could feel his breath stirring her hair. So near that their hands almost met. At last, she sank onto the mossy ground with a laugh, and then, pointing to her hat, which was full of the spring earth stars, said, laughingly, "What ruthless pillage! Do not pick any more, it is wasted." "Are you sure you have plenty?" he said. "Why hesitate when there are millions?" "No, no more," she said. "I feel guilty already." He glanced at the handful he had gathered, and saw the glance and laugh. "You do not know what to do with those you have, and still you want more? See, you must tie them in bundles." And then he threw himself beside her. She gathered them into bundles and tied them with a long stem or fern. And then he tried to do the same. But then his hands, white and slender as they were not as deft as hers, and he held the huge bundle to her. "You must tie it," he said. She laughed and put the fern round. But then it broke, and the prime roses fell in a golden shower over their hands. They both make a grasp at them, and then their hands met. Oh my god, I'm getting butterflies just reading the story. For a moment, Stella laughed, and then the laugh died away. For he still held her hand, and the warmth of his grasp seemed to be stealing upwards to her heart. With something like an effort, she drew her hand away and sprang to her feet. I must go," she said. "Uncle will wonder where I've gone." And then she looked down at the water with almost frightened eagerness. "You will know you are here, quite safe," he said. "Wait, do not go this moment. Up there, above our heads, we can see the river stretching away for miles. It is not a step. Will you come?" She hesitated for a moment, and then she turned and walked beside him, between the trees. A step or two, as he said, and then they reached a sort of plateau, crowned by the moss-grown rock, in which some rough steps were hewn. He sprang up the steps and reached the top, and then bent down and held out his hand. Stella hesitated a moment. "It will repay you your trouble. Come," he said, and then she put her hand in his and her foot on the first step, and he drew her upon beside him. "Look," he said. An exclamation of delight broke from Stella's lip. "You're not sorry you came?" I did not think it would be so lovely," she said. He stood beside her, not looking at the view, but at her dark, dilating, with her dark eyes dilating with a dreamy rapture, at her half-parted lips, and the sweet, clear-cut profile presented to him. She turned suddenly, and to hide the look of admiration he raised his hand and pointed out the objects in the view. "And what of those little house over there? asked Stella. That is one of the lodges, he said. Oh my god. Okay, I see where this is going. That is one of the lodges, he said. What? One of the lodges? One of your lodges, you mean? She asked. He nodded, lightly. Yes. And all of this between here and that lodge belongs to you? No, not to me, not an inch, he said, laughing. To my father. It is a great deal, she said. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining in. Too much for one man, you think? He said, with a smile. A great many other people think so too. I don't know what you would think if you knew how much we windwards have managed, at one time or the other, to lay our acquiring grasp on. This is just one of our smaller estates, he said, simply. Stella looked at the view dreamily. One of the smallest? Yes, I've heard that you're very rich. It must be very nice. I don't know, he said. You see, one cannot tell until one has been poor. I don't think there is anything in it. I don't think one is any happier either. There is always something left to long for. She turned her dark eyes on him with a smile of incredulity. What can you possibly have to hope to long for? She asked. He looked at her with a strange smile, and then, suddenly, his face grew grave and wistful, almost sad, as it seemed to her. You cannot guess, and I cannot tell you. But believe me that, as I stand here, there's an aching void in my heart, and I do long for something very earnestly. The voice was deep, but thrilling. She listened and wondered. And you should be happy, she said, almost unconsciously. Happy? He echoed. And then his dark eyes rested on hers with a strange expression that was half mocking. Wait, I don't really have the... Okay, I don't have the right emote for this. Half mocking and half sad. Do you know what the poet says? Count no man happy till he dies, do you mean? Said Stella. Yeah, I don't really have a sad emote, unfortunately. Okay, where was I? Yes, he said. I do not think what happiness means. I have been pursuing it all my life. Sometimes it has been within reach, but it has always evaded me, always slipped from my grasp. Sometimes I have resolved to let it go, to pursue it no longer. But fate had decreed that man shall always be seeking for the unattainable, that he who once looked upon for happiness with the eyes of desire, who stretched out his hands towards her, shall pursue her to the end. And but surely sometimes they get their desire? Some, he said. To find a prize is not worth the race they have for it. To find that they have to find that they have been wearied of it when it is gained. To find that it is no prize at all, but a delusive blank. all Dead Sea fruits that turns to dust upon the lips. Not all, surely, not all, she murmured, strangely moved by his words. No. Not all, he said, with a hidden light in his eyes that she did not see. To some, there comes a moment when they know happiness, real, true happiness, lies just beyond their grasp. And the case of rich man is more to be pitied than all others. What would you say if I told you that it was mine? She looked at him with a gentle smile, not on her lips, but in her eyes. I should say that I was very sorry, she murmured. I should say that you deserved. She stopped short, smitten by the sudden remembrance of all she had heard of him. He filled up the pause with a laugh such as she had not heard upon his lips till now. You were right to stop me, he said. If I get all the happiness I deserve, well, then no man will envy me. Let us go down, said Stella, gently. My uncle. He leaped down, and then held up his hand. Okay, that is chapter 7. We'll proceed to chapter 8 in a bit. Let me take a short break. What do you guys feel like so far? How are you guys feeling so far? Give me a man like him. Yeah. Are you guys enjoying the story? Are you guys enjoying your time? This is tiring actually. I actually have a bit of sore throat in the back of my... Yeah. So I think one more chapter before my voice disappears. No, why no? Okay, alright. Nice. Right, where was I? Okay. Alright, chapter 8. And this is going to be the last chapter for tonight, so make sure to get comfy and tuck yourself into bed. Yeah, I'm going to start now. Stella put hers into it, but reluctantly, and tried to spring. But her dress got caught, and she slipped forward. She would have fallen, but that was he. She would have fallen. But that was he was on the alert to save her. Quite simply and naturally, he put his arms around her and lifted her down. Okay. What a Chad. Okay. Only for a moment he held her in his embrace, her panting form close to his, her face almost resting on his shoulders. But that moment roused the blood in his fiery heart, and her face went pale. Are you hurt? He murmured. No, she said, and she slipped out of his arms and stood a little away from him, the colors coming and going in her face. It was the first time that any man's arms, other than her father's, had ever encircled her. Are you quite sure? He repeated. Quite, she said, and then she laughed. What would have happened if I had slipped? You would have sprained your ankle, he replied. Hey, you guys doing okay? Hey, right. Sprain my ankle? Really? She repeated, with open eyes. Yes, and I should have to carry you down to the boat, he said, slowly, She looked away from him. I'm glad I did not slip. And I, he said, am also glad. Thank you. You like my voice? Thank you so much. She stood and picked up the prime roses and ran down the slope, her cheeks aflamed. Oh, she's blushing. That's cute. A feeling that was suddenly something like shame, yet too full of a strange, indefinable joy to be sullen shame, took possession of her. With the light feet, her hat swinging in her hand, she threaded her way between trees and sprang on the grassy road beside the river bank. It did not follow so quickly, but stood for a moment looking at her, his face pale. Oh my god, dude, thank you so much for the roses. Thank you. It means a lot to me. Thank you. Love you all. Okay, where was I? Then Stella heard his step, firm and masterful, behind her. A sudden impulse tempted her sorely to jump into the boat and push off. She could pull for a pair of sculls, and her hand was on the edge of the boat, when she heard the sound of bells and paused with astonishment. Looking up, she saw a tiny python drawn by a pair of cream-white ponies coming along the road. It was the bells on their harness that she had heard. Oh my god, thank you so much for the heart, man. Thank you. They came along at a fair pace, and Stella saw that the phaeton was being driven by a coachman in a dark brown livery. But the next moment, all her attention was absorbed by the young girl who sat beside him. She was so fair, so lovely, so ethereal looking, that Stella was spellbound. A book was in her hand, ungloved, and small and white as a child's. But she was not reading. She held it so loosely that the phaeton came on top of the bank which hid Stella. The book dropped from the lax grasp of the white fingers. The girl uttered an exclamation, and Stella, obeying one of her sudden impulses, sprang lightly to the bank, picking up the book, and held it towards her. Oh my god, thank you so much for the rose, dude. It means a lot to me. Thank you, really. Okay, where was I? Okay. Her appearance was so sudden that Lady Lillian was startled for a moment, and the pale face was dyed with a faint color. Even after the moment had passed, she sat speechlessly, and the surprise in her eyes gave place to a frank, generous admiration. I need to make a new female voice. How do I do this? Never mind, I'll just speak normally for this one. It's a bit hard. Oh, thank you, she said. How kind of you. It was so stupid of me to drop it. But where do you come from? The clouds? And there was a delicious hint of flattery in the look that accompanied the words. Quite the reverse, said Stella with her open smile. I was standing below there, by the boat. She pointed. Oh, said Lady Lillian. I did not see you. You were looking the other way, said Stella, drawing back to allow the carriage to proceed, while Lady Lillian seemed reluctant to go, and made no sign to the coachman, who sat holding the reins like an image of stone, apparently deaf and dumb. For a few strokes of Time's scythe, the two girls looked at each other. The one with the pale face and blue eyes regarding the flesh healthy beauty of the other with a sad, wistful gaze. Then Lady Lillian spoke. "What beautiful primroses! You have been gathering them on the slopes," with a suggestion of a sigh. "Yes," said Stella. "Will you take them?" "Oh, no, no. I could not think of robbing you." Stella smiled with a characteristical archness. "It is I who have been the thief. I have been taking what did not belong to me. You will take these." Lady Lillian was too well bred to refuse. Besides, she thirsted for them. Hi, Roasted Banana. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the follows. Love you all. Okay, where was I? Okay. "If you give them to me, and will not mind picking some more," she said. Stella laid the bunch on the costly sables which wrapped the frail figure. Lady Lillian put them to her face with a caressing gesture. "You are, like me, fond of flowers?" she said. Stella nodded. "Yes." And then there was a pause. Above them, unseen by Lillian, forgotten by Stella, stood Lord Leicester. Hi, thank you all so much for the follow. Okay. My throat. Where was I? Okay. He was watching and waiting with a strange smile. He could read the meaning in his sister's eyes. She was longing to know more of the beautiful girl who had sprang like a fairy to her side. With a faint flush, Lady Lillian said, You are a stranger, are you not? I mean, you do not live here." "Yes," said Stella. "I live." And she smiled and pointed to the cottage across the meadow. "There." Cottage? Wait a minute. Okay, Lady Lillian started, and Lord Leicester seized the moment, and coming down, quietly stood by Stella's side. "Leicester!" exclaimed Lillian with a start of surprise. He smiled into her eyes, a strange and masterful, irresistible smile, it was as if he had said, "Did I not tell you? Can you withstand her?" But aloud he said, "Let me make the introduction in due form. This is Miss Atteridge, Lillian. Miss Atteridge, this is my sister. As the French philosopher said, know each other." Lady Lillian held out her hand. "I'm very glad," she said. Stella took the thin, white hand and held it for a moment. And then Lady Lillian looked from one to the other. Lord Leicester interpreted the glance at once. "Miss Atteridge has entrusted herself on the watery deep with me," he said. "We came across to gather flowers, leaving Mr. Atteridge to paint there." And he waved his hand across the river. Lady Lillian looked. "I see," she said. "I see. And he is painting. Is he not clever? How proud you must be of him." Stella's eyes grew dark. It was with the one word wanting to draw them together. She said not a word. I'm from Malaysia. You say your mum said what? Okay. Where was I? "Your uncle and I are old friends. Sometimes when I'm stronger, I'm coming to see him. When the weather gets warmer." And then Stella glanced at the frail form clad in sables. With a moistened eye, I'm going to spend a long afternoon among the pictures. He's always so kind and patient, and explains them all to me. But as I am not able to come to you, you will come to see me, will you not? There was a moment's silence. Lord Leicester stood looking over the river as if waiting for Stella's reply. Stella looked up. I shall be very glad, she said, and Lord Leicester drew a breath, almost of relief. You will you not? Yes, I will come, said Stella, almost solemnly. You will find me poor company, said the daughter of the great Earl. Wait, that's the wrong person. You will find me poor company, said the daughter of the great Earl, with meek humility. I see so little of the world that I grow dull and ignorant, but I shall be so glad to see you. And she held out her hand. I will come to see you, my lady. Lady Lillian looked at the coachman, who, though his eyes were fixed in quite another direction, seemed to see the glance, for which he touched the horse with a whip. Goodbye, she said. Goodbye. Then, as the phaeton moved on, she called out in her low, musical voice. There was an low echo of her brother's. Oh, Leicester, Lenore has come. Leicester raised his hat. Very well, he said. Goodbye. No, I am only alive now. Okay. Stella stood a moment, looking after her. Strangely enough, the last words rang in her ears with a senseless kind of insistence and emphasis. Lenore has come. She found herself repeating them mentally. I'm from Malaysia. Recalling herself if she turned swiftly to Lord Leicester. How beautiful she is, she said. Almost in a whisper. He looked at her with a gratitude in his eloquent eyes. Yes, so beautiful and so kind, Stella murmured, and the tears sprang to her eyes. I can see her face now. I can hear her voice. I do not wonder that you love her as you do. How do you know that I love her? He said. Brothers generally... Stella stopped him with a gesture. No man with a heart warmer than a stone could help loving her. And so you agree that my heart is warmer than a stone. Thank you for that, at least, he said with a smile that was not at all unselfish. Stella looked at him. Let us go now, she said. See, Uncle is getting his things together. Not without the primroses, he said. Lydian will break her heart if we go without any. Let me get some. And then he went up the slope. Stella stood in thought. The sudden meeting with the fairy-like creatures had filled her with strange thoughts. She understood now that rank and money is not all that is wanted for earthly happiness. So lost in thought that she did not hear the sound of a horse coming along the mossy road, though the animal was coming at a great pace. Lord Leicester's ears were freer and quicker, however, for he caught the sound and turned round in time to see a huge bay horse ridden by a tall, thin, dark young man, almost upon the slim form, standing with its back to it. With something like an oath on his lips, he dropped the flowers and with one spring stood between her and the horse. "Hello," okay, sorry, and seizing the bridle with both hands, threw the beast, with sheer force, on to its haunches. The rider has been staring at the river and was taken surprise so complete that the horse that rose on its legs was thrown from the saddle. As he was thrown from the saddle, Stella, alarmed by the noise, turned and swerved out of the path. And so they were grouped. Lord Leicester, pale with furious passion, still holding the reins and forcing the horse in an iron grip, and the erstwhile rider lying, huddled up on the mossy road. He lay still, only for a moment, however. The next he was on his feet and advancing towards Lord Leicester. It was none other than Jasper Addleston. His face was a deadly pale, making, by contrast, his small eyes black as coals. "What do you mean?" he exclaimed, furiously, and half unconscious, he raised his whip. It was an unlucky gesture, for it was all that was needed to rouse the devil in Lord Leicester. With one irresistible gesture, he seized the whip arm and the whip, and flinging the owner to the ground again with one movement, broke the whip and flung it on top of him with the other. It was all done in a second. With all the will in the world, Stella had no time to interpose before the rash act was accomplished. But now she sprang between them. "Lord Leicester!" she cried, pale and horror-stricken, as she gazed into his face, white and working with passion, all its beauty gone, and with the mask of a fury in its place. "Lord Leicester!" And at the sound of her voice, pleading, rebuking, a shiver ran through him. His hand fell to his side, and still holding the now plunging and furious horse with a grip of steel, he stood humbly before her. Not so Jasper Addleston. With a slow and sinuous movement, he rose and shook himself, and glared at him. Speechless from the sheer breathlessness of a furious hate, he stood and looked at the tall, velvet-clad figure. Stella was the first to break the silence. Oh, my lord," she said. At the sound of her reproachful voice, Lord Leicester's face paled. "Forgive me," he said, humbly. "Thank you so much for that, Yuki. Thank you. I beg you, I crave your forgiveness. But I thought you were in danger. You were. Then, at the thought, his fiery passion broke out again, and he turned to the silent, white-faced Jasper. "What the devil do you mean by riding in that fashion?" Jasper Addleston's lips moved, and at last speech came. "Hey Yuki, thank you so much for that." "You shall answer for this, Lord Leicester." It was in the worst word he could have said. In an instant, all of Lord Leicester's repentance fled. With a smothered oath on his lips, he advanced toward him. "What? Is that all you have to say? Do you know, you miserable wretch, that you nearly rode over this lady? Yes, rode over her. Answer for it. Confound you!" And he raised his arm. But Stella, all her wits, was in time. and her own arms were wound out about his, on which the muscles stuck thick and prominent like iron bands. With a gesture he became calm again, and there was a mute prayer for pardon in his eyes as he looked at her. "Do not be afraid," he murmured between his lips. "I will not hurt him. No, no." Then he pointed to the horse. "Mount, sir, and get out of my sight. Stop!" And the fiery passion broke out again. "No, by heaven, you shall not, until you have begged the lady's pardon." "No, no," said Stella. "But I say yes," said Lord Leicester, his eyes blazing. "Yuki, thank you so much. Is every tailor to ride through the chase and knock down whom he will? Ask for pardon, sir, or..." Jasper stood looking from one to the other. "No, no," said Stella. "It was all an accident. Pray do not say another word. Mr. Addleston, I beg you, please, we'll go without another word." Jasper Addleston hesitated for a moment. "Miss Stella," he said hoarsely. "Miss Stella?" exclaimed Lord Leicester. "Who gave you the right to address this lady by her Christian name?" Jasper bit his lip. "Miss Atteridge, you cannot doubt that I am heartily sorry that this unpleasant writing should have been caused by my carelessness. I was writing carelessly." "Like an idiot," broke in Lord Leicester. "Hey guys, thank you so much for the gifts. Love you all." "And do not see you. No harm would have been resulted, however, if Lord Leicester Wentworth had not, with brutal force, thrown me from the saddle. I should have seen you in time, and as I say, no harm would have been done. All that has occurred is this man, Lord Leicester Wentworth's fault. Again, I beg your pardon." And he bent his head before her. But he did so, and a malignant gleam shot out of his eyes in the direction of the tall, stalwart figure and white, passionate face. "No, no, there is no occasion," said Stella, trembling. I do not want you to beg my pardon. It was only an accident. You do not expect to see anyone here. I wish I had not come." Lord Leicester started. "Do not say that," he murmured, and then aloud, "Here is your horse, sir. Mount him and go home, and thank your stars that the lady has escaped without a broken limb." Jasper stood out a moment, looking at him, and then with another inclination of the head, he slowly mounted the horse. Lord Leicester, his passion gone, stood calm and motionless for the moment. Jasper... and then raised his hat with an old-world gesture. "Good day to you, and remember to ride more carefully in the future." Jasper Addleston looked down at him with a malignant smile on his thin lips. "Good day, my lord. I shall remember. I am not one to forget. No, I am not one to forget." And striking spurs into the horse, he rode off. Okay, that is the end of chapter 8. Ooh, what do you guys think so far? How do you guys feel about it so far? Are you guys enjoying yourself?